In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this adorable little mermaid cake. It's not little. Hi, it's Karolyn. If you want to learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, then I would love for you to join me by hitting subscribe and the bell. This week, this video I'm making is the entire cake from start to, well, not start to finish, decorating the whole thing. You have to have the cakes baked, iced, and ready to go. It is a sped up video. I'm going to voice over it and explain to you how I did everything. If you want more detailed videos, I'm going to link below different videos of techniques that I use in this video where I go into more detail. That way, if you want to learn a little more, you can click on those. And just a note, all of the supplies that I use in this video will be linked. If I can't find exactly what I use, because I have a lot of old stuff, I will find something similar and link it below. And also, I am going to separate this into chapters. That way you can bounce back and forth or review things if you want to easily see it again. And before I get started, I just want to thank you guys so much. I am so grateful for you. I'm having so much fun doing this, and I'm so glad I'm able to help you. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. That's enough of me talking, and let's get into the video.
All right, to start, I have some marshmallow fondant that I dyed teal, sprinkling a little bit of Tylose powder on there, knead it in. The Tylose powder is going to help the fondant hold its shape. So I put Tylose in all of my fondant. I'm going to have to set this aside so the Tylose powder can start to work. I'm just measuring the front of my cake with that little arrow and measuring how wide and tall that I'm going to have to roll the fondant out, making a mental note of it and putting that back in the fridge. Now I want to make the shells. Do you see how it has that little brown detail in it? So I have these candy melts, I have white and a little bit of chocolate brown, and I'm going to pop these in the microwave for about a minute. And once they're melted, mix them around, and I'm going to add just a little bit of the chocolate in, and I'm not mixing it completely so I can get kind of like a swirled effect. And now I have these silicone molds, pouring the chocolate in. And I'm using this little tapered spatula, and I'm pressing the chocolate into the cavities. That way I make sure that it's all the way down in the cavities. Scrape off the excess. And give it a little tappy, like Happy Gilmore. Tap, tap, tap-a-roo. Making sure that you get out all of the air bubbles, placing it in the refrigerator. Now the Tylose powder has started working, so I can roll this out. So I start by rolling it into a log, flatten it, get a little bit of cornstarch down, and I want to roll it out as long and as tall as I measured around the cake to make sure that it will fit around the cake. And I'm using a ruler just to make sure that it's long enough, and it is. Cutting straight edges. And now I want to make the scales. I have this little frill cutter. I don't know if they still make it. I could try to find it. If not, you're just gonna want to get a Mermaid scale impression mat. I will find either one and link it below. And I'm just lining this up and pressing it down all throughout the fondant to make these impressions. And you see I'm staggering, so the one underneath it isn't lined up exactly underneath. It's kind of like mermaid scales. And this process is a little lengthy, but getting a straight edge once I finish, straightening it with my ruler, and now I wanted it to be 6 inches tall, so I'm holding the 6 at the bottom and just making a line at the top, and I'm connecting the dots, cutting a straight edge so it's tall enough, getting a little bit of piping gel and putting it on my cold cake. The cake is cold, the icing is solid, I'm not going to mess it up. And after I put on piping gel, get a little bit of water on there, and it just helps make the piping gel a little more sticky. Wiping off the cake board so it's dry. And then I'm rolling this up. When I roll it up, I make sure that the bottom is all lined up, and then pressing it against the back of the cake and slowly pressing it around. Where it overlaps, get a ruler and an X-Acto knife, cut a straight line, remove the piece behind it, and press it together for a perfect little seal. Getting my fondant smoother, I'm just pressing it against the cake, I'm not rubbing it, and now I'm trying to use my hand and pull it down. It's sticking out a little too far, so I'm just trying to slide it down. Since I added the water over the piping gel, it is a little slippy, so I'm able to manipulate the fondant into the correct position. And I'm just making sure the fondant is adhered to the cake, pressing it in and making sure that it's all nice and even with the top and pretty and perfect. Nice. Now I will stick this back in the fridge and let's work on the number. I printed out this number 1. I measured my cake. I measured the number 1, make sure everything is the right size. I have Wilton gum text, the same thing as Tylose powder. I will link it below. Roll out the fondant that I'm using really thin. I have a round piping tip that I'm going to use and just cut a bunch of different circles in all of the colors of the cake that I'm using. Once those are all cut out, I am lining them on top of this number 1 to make sure I do this big enough. And what I want to do, they're all lined up next to each other, and now I'm cutting part way down and then pushing another little polka dot up in there, right? So this part is a little bit of a pain in the butt. If I had tiny Mermaid scale cutters, this would be a little easier, but I don't, so this is how I'm doing it. So you notice when I cut the 2 pieces, I'm keeping my other thumb on top to make sure that it doesn't move. I don't want these pieces to move at all, so you just have to be very careful cutting a circle so I can stick another circle in there, and I try to not make any of the same color touch. I have 4 different colors here that I'm using, and maybe that's just my OCD, but I just don't like the colors to touch, so I'll probably put a pink one there, it looks like, because there's purple and teal. Oh, no, I was wrong. It's teal, or it's blue. But anyway, as you see, 15, 20 minutes later, I finished the whole thing. And it covered the entire one, so I know it's big enough. I have some thin white fondant. Get some water on it. The fondant is mixed with Tylose powder. I'm getting it pretty wet. And then I'm going to slide gently that entire thing that I just made on top. So now the water's underneath it, and these are not going to fall apart. I am going to stick this on top, making sure that it's lined up correctly. Use my needle tool to poke, making a dotted line. Keep wiping it off on the wet paper towel as the fondant will start to stick to it, and you don't want that to happen. So I'm just keeping my left hand down and poking with my right hand so the paper doesn't shift. Peel it back. You can't see it, but there's a dotted line that I'm going to a dotted line that I'm going to follow. Take my X-Acto knife, and I'm sawing up and down. I'm not dragging it through because it's going to distort the polka dots. So just make a shallow cut first, following that dotted line that I made, and then put my knife all the way down to the board, cut it out, and like always, smoothing all of my cuts, just so there's no fondant sticking out. I have thicker light pink fondant, again mixed with Tylose. So I'm going to wet the back of the number 1, flip it over, and put it down. I have tutorials showing how I do numbers like this in detail, and I will link that below. I'm going to cut a thick border like in the picture, and again, I'm sawing. I'm making a shallow cut. I'm not cutting all the way down to the board. This way it's going to give you a line as a guide. Then you could stick your knife all the way down and cut without ruining the fondant. And now I want to see that gross part there. After you cut things out of fondant, it's just jagged and dirty. So I'm just smoothing everything down, taking my fingers, rubbing it around the edges, taking my tools, getting into the little creases, and making sure it looks pretty. So I do it on the back, and then I flip it over and do it on the front. Now I have a little skewer here, and I wet the skewer, and I'm twisting it when I do it. I'm not just jabbing it in there. I don't want to distort the number. Put it in the very center, and I'm twist and push, twist and push. I always say it. I'm like a broken record. Flip it over, make sure the skewer's not popping out, and then flip it over again. So I'm holding my other hand on top of it, making sure it's not poking out. Setting it aside. Now I want to transfer this to a 12-inch board instead of the 10-inch that it's on. So I have a video on how I make those boards, and I will link that below. Get a little buttercream. This is right out of the refrigerator. It's solid. I'm going to flip it over, peel the board away, and then place the cake on the bigger board. I feel like it needed more space, so I wanted to transfer it and show you how I do that. And now I am going to stack it. I have a full video showing you how I stack my cakes, and I will link that below, just measuring how long I have to cut my straws, making a little mark, cutting my straws, putting them in the cake, making sure it's level, put some buttercream on, and stacking the cake. Getting a dowel all the way into the cake board and patching that little hole with some buttercream, putting it back in the fridge. And now we're going to make the name. Same thing. I measured the cake, measured the name, make sure everything is the right size, and I'm using that hot pink fondant that I used before, and same thing, I'm just making the impression, tracing the outside of the name, making sure I could see it, use a tiny round tip to cut out the dot on the I. And whenever I cut out names, I always want to cut out the center pieces first. It's so much easier to do it that way and smooth it out. And then cutting out the rest of the name. Peeling it away and smoothing my cuts. So every time I cut anything out of fondant, I use my fingers, use my tools, smooth out the edges, flip over my paper, flip over the fondant, and now it's backwards. I'm getting a little bit of water on the back because I'm putting a background onto this. Once I get water on the whole thing, I'm going to realign it, making sure that the letters are in the correct position. Take my pink fondant, the good side is facing down, pressing it onto the wet fondant, and voila, there we go. It's transferred, has a background, and now I'm doing the same thing. I want to cut an even border the whole way around, and I'm going into these tiny little inside pieces as well. And again, do I have to say I'm going to smooth it? I'm going to smooth all my cuts. And I'm not ready to put this on the cake, so I'm going to put it in a Ziploc bag until I'm ready to use it. Now I'm going to make the little fins. Wait, the tail fins. Is that right? I'm rolling the fondant out a little thick. I have a leaf cutter. I can cut one side and then I cut the opposite side. So I flip the leaf cutter over. So I have them in two opposite directions, and you see how they fit together and they look like a little tail. And then I'm using my Dresden tool to make the little tail lines on the back and then flip it over and do it on the front. See how they're going to be put against the side of the cake? Now I'm going to put the skewers in on an angle. If it goes in straight, it's not going to be as secure as when the skewer goes in on an angle. It's going to go all the way up the little tail. So again, twisting it and pushing it in. I wet the skewers so it sticks to the fondant. Now I'm making the mermaid. Again, I printed out the mermaid, the size that I wanted. This is an edible image. I have a tutorial showing you how I use edible images, and I will link that below. Getting a little bit of piping gel on the back and putting it on a piece of fondant and using my X-Acto knife to carefully cut it out and smooth my cuts. Setting her aside as well. And now I want to make the bubbles. So I have a bigger round tip here. I think it's like an 809 Atigo tip. Cutting a bunch of circles, and you will see what I do with them later. Now I'm taking these out of the shells out of the mold so I could just peel them back. They were in the fridge for about like an hour, so they were really solid. Look how pretty that is. I love the variation. What are these, starfish? Wait, starfish? Anyway, they're a little annoying. Look, I break that every stinking time I take it out, but I can make it work. It's fine. You just have to be careful. I can see if I can find those and link it below. Now I want to get a little piping gel on the back of the name. Make sure I center it. It's facing front. I cut the skewers just so they were a little shorter so they weren't going to stick out of the cake, and getting a little bit of piping gel on there where it's going to touch the cake and pressing it into the cake. And look how adorable that is, the little mermaid tail. Now I have some sand. This is just some Oreos that I put in a food processor, blended it on high until it came into like a fine crumb. Get some piping gel all around the base of the cake and on the cake board. And that's going to prevent the crumbs from sliding all over the place. I have a little spoon here, and I'm just spooning the sand all over that piping gel that I just put down. Get a little piping gel on the back of the mermaid and center her on the tops here. And now I just want to stick the bubbles randomly all over the tops here. Getting a little piping gel on the bottom of the number 1 so it sticks to the cake. And I want to put toothpicks on either side. That way, when I stick it in here, it's not going to twist with those other toothpicks, so it's more secure. And I want to put a little more sand on the top around the one. So again, getting a little piping gel down and then putting a little bit of the sand around the number. And now I want to put the detail on the bubbles. I have a piping bag with a number 2 tip on it with some buttercream icing and a steady hand and just putting a little line on all of the bubbles. And now for the final touch, I'm putting the seashells on the cake. And I'm just finding the best spot for them. See where I broke this starfish? I'm going to put that against the top of the letter and get a little bit of icing on the back and stick it against the cake. And I'm putting the rest of the shells on here, just finding the best spot for them, getting a little bit of icing behind it and sticking them to the cake. And I also like to put one of those little starfish on the number topper. I think it looks cute up there. And as I'm sticking these to the cake, I'm not sticking it to the sand, so I'm getting some buttercream behind the back of the shell and pushing the sand out of the way to stick it down. And now I'm just measuring how long I have to cut the ribbon that's going around the cake board and getting a little bit of non-toxic glue around the whole thing. And on the back of the ribbon, press the ribbon against the board so it sticks. And then where it overlaps, just get a little bit of more glue behind it and press it down, running my finger over it one more time for good measure. And here is the mermaid cake. Adorable!
So there you go. There's how I make the mermaid cake. This is actually a design based on a cake that I made a long time ago, and it's just one of my most requested designs. I'll put the original one over here, and that one had a fondant mermaid on it. However, Kelsey's mom opted for the edible image mermaid, which I purchased her on Etsy and printed her out. And again, I will link in the description below how I use my edible printer and where I get my printing supplies. Just look below, everything's down there. So I think that's it. If you have any other questions or comments, leave them below. And you can follow me on socials, check out my website. Everything is listed in the description below. I always say that, but literally everything's down there. You just gotta click. And if you wanna stick around, you can watch these 2 videos next, am I pointing at them? And hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Please like this video if you liked it. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.